Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast. We are on to week number 3 of the NFL season. Sorry about last week. We took the week off. Things happened, but we are here ready to get you going with the starts and sits heading into this pivotal week 3 matchup. You're either 1-1, 2-0, or hopefully not 0-2 at this point. But hey, stranger things have happened, but that's what we're here for. We are here to navigate these fantasy seas. And Tara, when I'm looking at the news and notes from last week, why do we continue to give RB0 truthers any more ammunition? Because we just saw running backs going down left after right after left after right. I mean, it was like a marching injury, whatever you want to call it, at the running back position. Tara, what's going on?
I don't know if we're giving, yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know if we're giving the zero RB truthers all that ammunition because if they pick James Cook and they're feeling good, but if they pick like Rashad Penny and Alexander Madison and who else is another one that was in there that you could like Khalil Herbert, who might be partially out of a job soon. I mean, you could be suffering. So it goes both ways. It's literally just you pick the best players and you cross your fingers. But yeah, I hate all of the injury stuff that's happening right here, especially with running backs. I mean, quarterbacks come back, right? Kyler Murray can tear an ACL and he'll be back. And maybe he loses, some mobility temporarily, but it's not a career ender, right? But these running backs, it just breaks my heart watching them suffer these, potentially career ending injuries on such short career years. It's just terrible.
Well, let's talk about one of those potential career-ending injuries, and it's one that happened on Monday Night Football to Nick Chubb. I mean, I'm no doctor, and I haven't heard the official report, but as soon as that happened, I kind of said, my initials are MD, so I figured that qualifies me somewhat in the medical world here. But the way I looked at that, knees bend at a 90-degree angle, but usually you're sitting in a normal position. That knee went 90 degrees the other direction. Like, it went in ways it isn't supposed to go. And right away, I'm like, I don't know much about medical world here, but I'm telling you, that's a dislocated knee, multiple ligament type injury. People are like, well, what qualifies you? I said, my eyes. I looked at that. I mean, he's lucky if he tore something, because if he stretched it, that's got to be worse than actually tearing it. I mean, the recovery time behind that. And when you look at Nick Chubb and what that means, I don't know how he bounces back from that injury. Like, that is a significant injury. We've watched running backs, J.K. Dobbins trying to work his way back after his knee injury. We're watching running backs right now, Breece Hall and even Javonte Williams to degree working their way back in. And their utilization has been fantastic, and they've looked okay. Their burst hasn't come all the way back yet. But I'm looking at Nick Chubb here. I don't know how you get back to being Nick Chubb after that kind of a knee injury.
Yeah, I agree. It just, especially when consider age as well. The only fortunate thing is at least he got a contract extension before this, so he didn't have to deal with the same thing that J.K. Dobbins is unfortunately going to have to deal with. But yeah, that was a rough one, especially to the same knee that he had injured before.
Yeah, it's not good. And the running backs have such a short shelf life to begin with, and they don't have an opportunity to maximize their earnings. So good news is Chubb, he got himself a little extra pay there, like you mentioned there. But still, man, Nick Chubb, he is one of the greatest backs that we have had an opportunity to see. I mean, this latest generation, Nick Chubb is one of the top 5 running backs, I think, since he came into the league. And I don't think that's really for an argument. But another one of the top 5 running backs that we've had an opportunity to see in the last 10 years or so is Saquon Barkley. And we're getting kind of mixed reports out right now that ankle injury, it's an ordinary ankle injury, so to speak. We heard 3 weeks possibility, but now Brian Daboll's talking about, hey, you know what? He's a quick healer. He may be back for Thursday Night Football. Well, Brian Daboll, first off, coaches lie all the time. I don't trust you one way or the other here, but could he be onto something? Could Saquon Barkley possibly play on Thursday Night Football? And if so, are you playing Saquon Barkley on Thursday Night Football?
I mean, if Saquon's playing, you're playing Saquon. But here's the thing. we know that they gave him a 1-year deal. We know that he has no true incentive to push himself in. Now, that's not to say that he's just going to mail it in or anything, but this is a quick turnaround. Your body is the value for you monetarily. And for an ankle injury, it's not uncommon to see a week, Eckler. It's not uncommon. So why would he push himself to be ready for a Thursday night football game? I don't see it happening personally.
No, I don't see how this is happening. I don't know how he'd want to. I mean, it worked. If he does, it's the San Francisco 49ers. That's not exactly a game you want to go in there playing on one leg. Now, another running back who's down to one leg, it's Austin Eckler, who looks like he's still going to be out heading into week number 3. We knew that he had a tough matchup anyway against Tennessee. We saw Joshua Kelly struggle a little bit. If you were watching the show or listening to us just about anywhere, you knew that Joshua Kelly was a temper your expectations type play going against the Tennessee Titans, who are one of the best run defenses against fantasy running backs. That's no secret out there. But Austin Eckler, I don't think he's going to play this week, and he could be out for another week yet on top of that as they try to get themselves ready. The problem with all this whole situation is the Los Angeles Chargers, they're 0-2. Can they afford Eckler not to go back out there? And again, like Saquon Barkley, Eckler was quite vocal about wanting to get paid prior to the season. He may not have the same incentives to get out there anytime soon. Do you think we're going to see Austin Eckler anytime soon? And if so, can you trust him?
Yeah, I mean, you can trust him. But again, you are 100% correct. In a year where we know these running backs are all upset about the money, the only leverage that, theoretically they have is not playing. Although that does give the next man up the, opportunity there. But at the same time, they're protecting their bodies. They're, sticking it to the team. They're not pushing themselves. So, yeah, it's possible we don't see him again, but I don't see where this becomes a Jonathan Taylor type of deal. So just hold on and just relax for a second. You might miss another week. Hopefully not more.
I love that you mentioned Jonathan Taylor, because I'm going to slide right on into that and talk about the Indianapolis Colts. We don't know what's going on with Jonathan Taylor yet. We're seeing him at Indianapolis. He's working out there a little bit. He looks pretty good. I mean, that ankle looks fine from what I can see. But again, not a doctor. But what was interesting is the Colts went out there and they signed Trey Sermon. Remember him? Former 49er, former Philadelphia Eagle. Is this something? Is this nothing? Like, when we're talking about Jonathan Taylor's future in Indianapolis, could Trey Sermon be that kind of piece that comes in Indianapolis so that we know Jonathan Taylor is on his way out? Or could Jonathan Taylor somehow end up being an Indianapolis Colts? We talked about this a couple weeks ago that neither one of us really believed that Jim Irsay had any reason to trade Jonathan Taylor. Like, we're talking about Jim Irsay here. But could this be like, hey, you know what? We got Trey Sermon. We can let Jonathan Taylor go.
No, not at all. We got to remember that Evan Hull. Sorry, there's so many rookies that have oddly similar names. Evan Hull got injured, and they lost every single ounce of confidence in Deion Jackson. He went down to legitimately nothing, and Zach Moss got every single running back opportunity you could have. But that's not realistic workload for literally anyone outside of Derrick Henry, right? So, they had to add someone because they've still got a couple more games to deal with without Jonathan Taylor, even if they can reconcile, which ultimately I do kind of think they will end up reconciling. But yeah, they had to add someone. I think it speaks more to the fact that Evan Hull is probably not going to be back for a few games.
Well, speaking of running backs who also went down with injury, David Montgomery. He looks like he's going to miss 2 to 3 weeks here dealing with that hamstring knee type situation that he's got going on there. The Detroit Lions went out there and they signed Zenovan Knight. Remember him? Bam Bam, former New York Jet, now a Detroit Lion. There may be another back in Detroit that we talk about when it comes to our waiver wire additions here, but when I look at this is obviously nothing, but this is telling me that David Montgomery's probably closer to that 3 weeks that he's going to miss than he is a week or two. So that's just something to keep an eye on there. And another injury that was significant this week was Brandon Ayuk and that shoulder injury. Now, it sounds like he underwent that CT scan there back on Monday that revealed no break in the clavicle area, which is obviously great news for Ayuk, who's one of my favorite wide receivers, who is borderline wide receiver one type numbers there heading out of week number 1. A guy that I felt was like, hey, this guy could be a top 15 wide receiver when it's all said and done. Obviously, he had a down week because of the injury, but that's where we are. Now, with that all being said, let's kind of take a look back at some of the maybe more positive fantasy notes heading from week number 2 into week number 3. And things are getting weird, man. Things are getting weird, Tara. At the quarterback position, Daniel Jones and Joshua Dobbs were top fantasy options. We're talking about like top 5 fantasy quarterbacks. Can either one of these guys even flirt with a QB1 heading into week 3 or beyond that?
Not Joshua Dobbs. I mean, that things happen, right? And every now and then, you get a matchup that works in your favor. That obviously worked in their favor. We have discovered that it turns out the Giants offense wasn't really that spectacular during preseason and training camp. It was just that their defense was a horrific mess. But Daniel Jones, we love him here. The upside exists, the legs, maybe with Saquon down, obviously they end up running him a little bit more than they already do. So the upside exists for him always. But no, I think Joshua Dobbs just kind of lucked up on a good situation in one particular matchup.
Yeah, that's not usually good when you have two of the top fantasy quarterbacks playing each other, and they're both not good teams. And I think that was the perfect storm for Dobbs and Daniel Jones, because we've watched. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The Dallas Cowboys are a great defense, but we're talking about this Giants offense. It hasn't been very good so far. So there's a lot of questions about how they're going to move forward with this offense, especially if Saquon Barkley misses time. And all throughout the offseason, all we heard was how undefendable Darren Waller was in the red zone. Well, so far, he's been defended pretty good. Now, another big news here at the running back position is the fact that Brian Robinson and Raheem Mostert were like RB1 and RB2 when it comes to standard. And you can throw in Kyron Williams there as the RB2 when it comes to PPR. Even Mostert, I think he was RB6 when it came to PPR scoring there. So when we look at Robinson and Mostert there, in general, can either one of these guys be a guy that you feel comfortable starting each and every week?
Yeah, I will start Raheem Mostert as long as he is healthy. You can't predict when it's going to happen, but you keep on rolling him out until you are no longer able to do that. And then he goes into your IR spot. And Brian Robinson, yeah, I'm fully on board with Brian Robinson on a weekly basis. Antonio Gibson, he's remaining involved, but obviously they're clearly just not giving him those high value touches. Brian Robinson looks excellent. We have to remember that what we saw out of him last year, like he was post gunshot wound, right? So what we see out of him this year is obviously a more effective version of what we saw last year. And he's being utilized as a, not a 3-down back traditionally, but a high volume back. And he has gotten pass catching upside as well. And I think you have to trust it. When you are a high volume running back, even if it's a shaky situation offensively, these guys are producing. You have to buy into it.
Yeah, Robinson was one of those guys that's making me look like a genius early on, because I was high on Robinson just because of what we saw towards the end of the season there. When he was getting some volume, he was producing. And basically, you got to remember, he was a rookie last season who missed all of rookie camp, who missed training camp, whatever that looks like. So you knew there's going to be some struggles early on. The other running back that's been making me look like a genius is Alexander Madison, because quite frankly, you know how much I haven't liked him throughout the offseason. And so far, I've been looking pretty good as far as Madison is concerned. As far as the wide receivers are concerned, 2 more underappreciated wide receivers made their appearances in the top 12 this week, and that was Nico Collins and Josh Reynolds, 2 guys that were probably on your waiver wires, probably 2 guys that are still on your waiver wire. Now, can either one of these two be a solid flex option, or maybe even creep into wide receiver 2 categories here, not only just in week number 3, but throughout the season? Is there a guy that you trust a little bit more than the other?
Oh, absolutely. Nico, but I've been on Nico, I mean, just aggressively for a while. I mean, he was my highest drafted pre-draft best ball tournament player easily. It wasn't even close. Post-draft, I fell in love with Tank Dell. I guess that's working out too. But yeah, this Houston offense is the run game is just terrible. The offensive line is terrible. And CJ Stroud is going to have to more than likely throw for high volume week after week after week. Nico has asserted himself as the wide receiver 1. I loved him heading into the season because, again, we saw him be able to take over as the wide receiver 1 when Brandon Cooks was actually, it was a small sample size, but they were healthy and on the field at the same time. And Nico was asserting himself as the wide receiver 1, the target hog in the offense, and it continued. He's trustworthy for sure. You want to roster him. He better not be on your waiver wire. Grab him immediately. Josh Reynolds is someone who I do like, and I think he is solidly the wide receiver 2 in that offense. And he's reliable. And again, this is a high volume offense. And unfortunately, the defense has improved, but they just suffered injury to the secondary, unfortunately, with CJ Gardner-Johnson.
No.
And, that just kind of takes that hit. And it's probably going to mean that they're going to have to continue to push aggressive pass volume. And I like what Reynolds brings to the offense. It's just a matter of how much do you trust once Jameson Williams comes back. But honestly, he could retain that wide receiver 2 role. There's no reason to not keep him and see how it all shakes out because he is valuable.
These are 2 other wide receivers that made me look smart last week. I really loved that Nico Collins was getting the volume. In the offseason, we talked about that on this show, actually. 300 vacated targets were available in the Houston Texan offense from last season. Well, that number is probably closer to 400 the way CJ Stroud's out there tossing 47 balls per game right now. And Nico Collins is seeing 11 of those targets. So the volume is going to be there for Nico Collins. He's going to be a volume play. Now, Josh Reynolds is a guy that I said you could start him in your flex last week. I felt very confident in him. When you have the wide receiver 2 in a top 5 passing offense that the Detroit Lions have, he's going to have that fantasy value. And like you said, when Jameson Williams comes back, there was enough red flags this offseason that tell me that Jameson Williams is not going to be a starter when he comes back. Look, we know he got suspended for some ill-advised decisions that he made on the facility when it came to the NFL's gambling policy there. And then in the most important time of his career, he ends up injuring his hamstring and misses pretty much all of training camp. So even when he does come after his 6-game suspension, he's probably 3 weeks away from even cracking the lineup, let alone that. And by then, I think it's too late for Jameson Williams to be much more than just a deep threat kind of guy. So I really love Josh Reynolds to remain in this role moving forward. Now, we do like to talk about where we hit, where we miss. We'll talk about that in a second. But we know people are trying to get those last-minute waiver wire claims in. So, Tara, just kind of go through your top 3 waiver wire additions this week.
I mean, it's no surprise it's Jerome Ford. I understand people are, Kareem Hunt. But I feel like people that are very aggressively, like Kareem Hunt's going to come back here and, claim the RB1 spot. I wonder if and this is not judgment, but I wonder if it's redraft versus dynasty players, because the dynasty community, we're fully on board and we've been on board with Ford, right? So this is not, he's someone who was one of my favorite late round draft picks for a while. So this is not something new. This is not some random happenstance that's him being able to step into the RB1 role within Cleveland. So I understand that people are fearful of the addition of Kareem Hunt. We don't even know for sure that's going to happen. He came to visit. Like, we've seen him go and visit multiple teams. Obviously, money is understandably, not judgment, money is a concern from him. He wants a good contract if you're going to go out there and put your body on the line again. So we don't know for sure that they can even, bring him back and reconcile this and what kind of role he would step into. So don't lock it in yet. Um, Jerome Ford is someone who, in my opinion, even if Kareem Hunt is on the team, will still profile as the lead back. He obviously, we feel like Kareem Hunt did lose a step. He's a little bit older. So you got to keep that in mind. After that, Zach Moss, he is still available, surprisingly, or not surprisingly. Again, we talked about this when you brought up Trey Sermon, Matt. Zach Moss is the literal only running back that they have right now that they're willing to give the ball to. So if he is on the waiver wire, I know it is a short-term thing if JT does in fact come back from the pup and starts, but if you're scraping and you need to throw somebody in, you can throw in Zach Moss for right now because nobody else is. They've lost the faith in Deion Johnson. Trey Sermon's not going to come in there and grab a bunch of volume. Zach Moss is going to have this until JT comes back, and then Rashawn Johnson. Kind of tipped my hat a little in speaking of Khalil Herbert. They're in a committee, and Rashawn has the higher value touches, the upside, those receiving touches, and he's looked better, quite frankly. And it's very possible that he just continues to eat and eat and eat into Khalil Herbert's workload and is a value for you long term. So that's someone else that you want to grab and stash. You want to get ahead with these handcuffs.
Yeah, I'm right with you there when it comes to Jerome Ford. And it's too bad that Major's not here because Major was all in on Jerome Ford even before the season started, which is actually probably a good thing that he's not here because we probably wouldn't hear the end of it. But then again, I'm upset that we didn't do a show last week because I was really going to celebrate the Darnell Mooney, Jacoby Myers double touchdown performance from week number 1 that I didn't really get a chance to celebrate last week. But Major would be all over the Jerome Ford news. So I don't think I need to talk about that anymore. Nico Collins is another guy that I'm adding on the waiver wire because for some reason he's still on the waiver wire. Just like Zach Moss, these guys should not be on the waiver wire. They should already be scooped up and put on your roster somewhere in every league out there. And the other one is, I get this one a lot, like on the Discord channels there with Fantasy Points and with Roto Baller. Should I pick up DeAndre Swift? I get it. We've been hurt before. We've gone through this whole Swift situation in years past. If Swift is healthy, it looks like he's going to have a role in Philadelphia. Now, the interesting question becomes Kenneth Gainwell or DeAndre Swift. Who do you pick up? Because Gainwell was the starter over DeAndre Swift, but DeAndre Swift, he absolutely balled out in week number 2. So it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic looks moving forward. But upside here at DeAndre Swift, we know what that upside is, and that's a guy that I feel you can trust. Some other guys we talked about here, Josh Reynolds, another guy that's on the too many waiver wires. You got to go out there and grab him right now as well. So there's lots of options out there. And Kyren Williams, I've even heard his name still on the waiver wire. I don't know why his name would even be out there because you should be picking him up. He's already a top 15 running back this season. There's no reason for something like that to be on the waivers. Now, we hit and miss every single week, and we try and do our best, but we like to hold ourselves accountable. So who was a player that you hit on last week, and who's a player that you missed?
A player that I hit on last week was James Cook. Really, really bullish on James Cook as a top 10 back. Loved what I saw out of him in a tough matchup. Loved what I didn't see, even though we did see the addition of this past week, the addition of Latavius Murray and Damian Harris a little bit more, not to the extent to where this isn't clear that this is James Cook's backfield. So absolutely hit on that one on all fronts. And then miss, I let some people talk me into this one. I do a lot of shows, a lot of start sets, I got a lot of
Tara,
co-hosts.
this one hurts me. This one hurts me. This means you weren't listening to me.
No, I've been very don't start running backs against Tennessee. But I let some people talk me into the volume, hey, the volume would, and I won't blame it on other people here. The ball was going to move so well and the passing offense was going to do so well that there would be goal line opportunities for Joshua Kelly. But it didn't matter. You just don't start your running backs against Tennessee. You don't get cute. Even you just don't get cute with it. It doesn't happen. So that was a miss that I had. My apologies, guys. I should have stuck to my guns and said, no, don't do it.
Yeah, we're the same way as everybody else, right? We make our final decisions when it comes to our lineup. So ultimately, when we mess up our lineup, it's all on us. And whenever I go out there and I give start and sit advice there, I'm legitimately starting the guys I'm saying to start, and I'm sitting the guys that I say I'm going to sit, which is going to be interesting when we get a little bit further down on this show sheet because there's some interesting ones here. But for me, I went on my show there and I was like, hey, sit Kirk Cousins, but you know what? I have no problem if I'm wrong. I want to be wrong sometimes when I sit a player because all the data, all the mojo, everything that we know about fantasy football was telling us it's 6 p.m. and Kirk Cousins needs to be in bed. You cannot start Kirk Cousins on prime time. I have been guilty of starting him multiple times on prime time, and it hasn't worked out. So the one time that I decide to sit Kirk Cousins on prime time, he goes out there and throws for 364 yards and 4 touchdowns. And yet I'm okay with that because I can't hate this guy. I mean, the dude shops at Kohl's and all this other stuff. I mean, I love Kirk Cousins, so I got no problem being wrong on him. But I was saying to sit him to just about anybody who would listen because you don't start Kirk Cousins on primetime. It's just something you don't do. It's like starting Andy Dalton on primetime. That's a no-no. That's going to get you drinking like Big Mac smoothies and whatnot. Now, the guy that I hit on was George Kittle. I've been wary about him since week number 1. He's been on my sit list the last couple weeks. I just haven't been able to trust him and where he's at, especially this 49ers offense. Even when Brandon Ayuk went down, he really didn't step up. It was a Deebo Samuel type game at that point. So I don't know where George Kittle's fitting in here. He's been turned into more of a blocking type tight end more than anything. I think he's still dealing with a little bit of that groin strain that he suffered there during training camp. He's not close to 100%. And until he gets there, we can't trust him. And the scary thing is this tight end position is a fantasy wasteland like no other. Week 1, we didn't have Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. And basically, guys that I was saying to sit, and I was right, they scored 8 fantasy points. Those were top 10 type weeks from these tight ends. That's how bad the position had gone. So if you were getting 8 fantasy points, you were a top 10 player at the tight end position last week. That's not changing. That isn't going anywhere. And for me, that's kind of scary because I look at this and I'm like, where do we go? Can you start sitting George Kittle because he's going to give you tight end 31 numbers? Meanwhile, you got a guy like Cade Otton going out there and balling out against whoever he's playing. So it is upside down, inside out. Thankfully, we got Travis Kelce that we can trust again. Thankfully, we can trust in Mark Andrews, maybe even TJ Hawkinson. But outside of those top 3, it is really playing tight end roulette with the position. Now, with that being said, we are going to start playing roulette with our starts and sits, starting at the quarterback position. Tara, who are you starting? Who's a must start at the quarterback position? And who are you fading?
I am starting Tua Tagovailoa in a bounce back week. I know it's not innovative, but we're not always innovative in terms of our start recommendations here because sometimes there are some guys, further back and you just can't find one that's a fantastic start. But again, with Tua, last week was a tough defensive matchup against New England. That was expected. A subpar performance against them. It happens. Even Jalen Hurts was disappointing against them. It's just a year in and year out stout defense. And this week versus Denver bodes very well for him. And typically you think Denver, you think strong defense, but they've been getting lit up. They just got lit up by Sam Howell, who was 27 of 39 for 299 yards, 2 touchdowns. Even Jimmy G had a decent week against them in week 1. So this Denver defense, this Denver team as a whole just might be, unfortunately, still struggling as they try to recover with Sean Payton. And I believe that Tua will be able to exploit that. So for sure, don't be scared of what you saw last week and, a bad floor game, but we'll have a nice bounce back in this one. My must sit of the week, it's very uninspiring. I'm sorry. It is Mac Jones versus the New York Jets. And I felt comfortable including it because maybe some people have feeling a little bit cute with Mac Jones because he's been passing for some higher volume. And he's had, he had an interesting, big week 1, and maybe people are feeling like there's something there with him. I don't believe there is, and especially against the New York Jets, I'm not going to trust that at all. So don't get cute. Even if you're in Superflex, find another way to pivot from him. Mac Jones, I don't feel it this week, unfortunately.
That hurts my feelings, man, because I just watched what Dak Prescott did against that New York Jets secondary. I did not see that coming. Maybe Mac Jones will be inspired by that performance, and that'll carry into week 3. Probably not, though. Now, for me, Kirk Cousins is a must start this week. I am back with my boy Kirky. We are going to get it done. Yes, I like that. And I also like the matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, you look at this. This was supposed to be a tough matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles last week. We saw this happen in 2022 where the Eagles, I think it was on Monday Night Football, made Kirk Cousins look silly. And then this year, he went out there on Thursday Night Football and threw for 364 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, the Vikings, they did drop a pair of consecutive games, so you can't blame Kirk when it comes to this one here. But this week against the Chargers, a team that has allowed 712 passing yards so far this season, you have to feel like Kirk Cousins is a lock, not to be just a top 12 quarterback, but a top 5 quarterback here in week number 3. He's going to remain hot, and he's just going to fire it up this week. I love this matchup. Now, in the Chargers defense, they did get lit up against Tua Tagovailoa in week number 1, so those numbers are slightly misconstrued there against Tyreek Hill. But hey, this is Justin Jefferson we're talking about, so I think we have a pretty good sample of what to expect here this week. Now, my sit this week, it's that Daniel Jones. And, we love Vanilla Vic on this show. And I can say that because Major's not here to kind of womp me. So, but San Francisco 49ers this week, that is not a good matchup for anybody. So looking at Daniel Jones, he's gone from the fantasy outhouse to the penthouse, back to the outhouse. That is what happens in fantasy football. 1 week you're up, the next week you're down, and we go on from there. Now, we did see him. I mean, you can't really take anything away from him against the Dallas Cowboys, but then he played against the Arizona Cardinals. So really, the truth has to lie somewhere in the middle. San Francisco is probably closer to Dallas than they are to Arizona when it comes to their defense. And the one thing that always gets me, this 49ers defense has only given up 2 passing touchdowns, and yet they have 4 interceptions so far this season. And if you don't have a 100% healthy Saquon Barkley, Nick Bosa is going to sit back there, pin his ears back, and he's going to get after the quarterback. I don't care how fast Daniel Jones is going to be. He's going to have to be even faster to keep away from Nick Bosa this entire contest. So I have a feeling that this is one of those games where Daniel Jones is going to get sacked 5 times, and it's not going to be pretty. So I'm begging you right now, sit Daniel Jones this week. There's going to be better days ahead for him, but this is not it. Now, we want to talk about another good day for another running back here. Tera, who's a must-start running back? And throw a sit in there as well.
Before I do that, I will say I will roll out Daniel Jones. I get it why we don't want to, start him against San Francisco. We saw how absolutely looked like Kenny Pickett was seeing ghosts out there last week. But I will say that if Saquon doesn't play, we might see legitimately Daniel Jones run for like 80 plus yards. I mean, it really could happen. So he could complete like 12 passes and then run for some obscene yardage and have a fine fantasy day. So technically speaking, I'm not on the you have to sit on bandwagon. But for running backs, my must start is Najee Harris. It's very simple here. You got to give Najee a chance against Vegas. I get it. The production has been horrendous. The involvement from Jaylen Warren has been concerning, but in my opinion, you got to go with the matchup here and not panic. He is still the RB1 of that offense, and the production that he's had, quite frankly, he has just, had these horrible matchups to start the season. absolutely horrible, but it's going to get better. This is a good matchup. He's got another one coming up as well. So you start Najee Harris this week. And again, the sit here is really simple. It's Jerome Ford against Tennessee. You're picking him up, but you're not starting him against Tennessee. We're sticking to our guns here. This one's going to be an interesting matchup, though. I hesitated to put Deshaun Watson as my controversial sit because we're gonna get very detailed information here. If he is able to have a nice bounce back situation against Tennessee's defense, where you should be able to throw on them aggressively, then we can say, okay, we can reevaluate better matchups and Deshaun Watson can be reliable. If he goes out there and he lays another egg in this situation and Cleveland looks awful, red flags, it's over. We're done. So this Tennessee Cleveland game is going to be very interesting to watch as a whole.
I couldn't agree with you more on those two picks there. I mean, we know you're not starting Jerome Ford against the Tennessee Titans. This is one of those things I kind of talked about. And Najee Harris was actually in one of my starts here because I look at what James Cook did against this same Raiders team last week. He averaged something like 7 yards per carry. And the thing is, the Raiders are giving up about 32 fantasy points to the running back position. So, again, just like Deshaun Watson, if Deshaun Watson can't put up production against this Tennessee Titans pass defense, if Harris fails to give you a 15-point week, then it might be time to give up on Najee Harris here because Jaylen Warren, he's ready to pick up that slack in his own right, who could be a sleeper here this week against that same Raiders defense. But for me, I am starting Isaiah Pacheco versus the Chicago Bears. The Bears offense stinks, but so does their defense. It hasn't improved, and this was one of the worst run defenses last season. They've already allowed 175 yards on the ground to running backs. They've allowed 133 yards to running backs in the passing game. And this is one of those things that Isaiah Pacheco is going to sit back there and get this Kansas City Chiefs offense right again. Kansas City's offense hasn't looked right so far this season. This is one of those games, a get-right type game where Pacheco is going to run and run and run, and it's going to open things up for Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is going to be like, hey, Chicago, you should have drafted me, and all this other fun stuff. We're going to hear that narrative all throughout the week. Bottom line is, we are not accustomed to the Chiefs struggling, and the best way to ail a struggling offense is to get that run game going. And we know that Pacheco can run the ball. And we know that just about any running back that faces this Bears defense is going to be able to run the ball against it. So put one and one together and you're going to have a good fantasy week for Isaiah Pacheco. Now I'm sitting Dameon Pierce against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Is it Jaguars? Jaguars? You know what? That's for a totally different show another day of the week here. But we talk about how good the Dallas Cowboys are when it comes to stopping the run. Well, Jacksonville's only allowed 93 rushing yards this season to running backs through 2 weeks. That's pretty darn good. Now, Pierce, he's going to have a better chance to produce than maybe some other guys, but he's coming off a game in which he only averaged 2.1 yards per carry, and that's a little bit of an alarming situation for me because he did have an opportunity to carry the ball 15 times. If he can't start producing, CJ Stroud's just going to keep on throwing the ball. We may see Stroud throw the ball 50 times this week because we get an opportunity to see the golden boy, Trevor Lawrence, against CJ Stroud this week. And that's one of those kind of big-time matchups that quarterbacks dream of each and every year. But man, I can't trust Pierce. I mean, this Jacksonville Jaguars run defense is good. Their pass defense is a little bit vulnerable, much like Tennessee. This is telling me that the Houston Texans are probably going to need to throw a little bit more than run, and that is not going to work out very well for Dameon Pierce here in week number 3. Now, moving along to the wide receiver position. Tara, give me another must start and must sit.
My must start is my boy, Zay Flowers. I mean, I don't feel like there's any massive explanation needed. He has clearly asserted himself as the wide receiver one of that offense in Baltimore, and the matchup is fantastic. We need to be targeting the Indianapolis secondary every single week. This could be a fantastic breakout performance for him. We've got Odell that, appears to technically be his biggest competition, if it's even considered competition for that wide receiver one spot, but he's dealing with an ankle injury. You know how that goes. And Rashad Bateman just hasn't looked like anything at all. So this should be a heavy dose of Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. You got to start him. If you've been debating when to, maybe had him on your bench and you felt like you had better options, now is the week to start him. My sit is going to be Marquise Brown versus Dallas, which I don't like because I'm more pro Marquise Brown than the vast majority of people. Because again, he's talented. I know it's a bad offense, it's a bad quarterback, bad situation, but he is Marquise Brown. As we saw last week, he can step up and have strong performances. I just don't think that it's going to happen against Dallas. We did see that, Zach Wilson was able to have one good pass to his wide receiver one, and that was cool. But that's not going to happen every single game. Dallas's defense is an absolute menace. They should give Arizona all kinds of fits. Yeah, I just don't think you want any part of Marquise Brown if you can afford to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. That hurts me so much not to be able to start Marquise Hollywood Brown because I love him. I absolutely love what he can do as a wide receiver. I think he was an absolute bargain where you're getting him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 that had that wide receiver 2 upside throughout the offseason. This isn't it. You got Stephon Gilmore on one side, you got Trevon Diggs on the other. There's nowhere for him to really go. Now, for me, I am starting Jordan Addison versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers secondary, we talked about how generous they were to quarterbacks. Well, they've given up 565 receiving yards to the receiver position and 4 touchdowns in just 2 games. And they're going to have their hands full dealing with Justin Jefferson. And if you look at the target rate and everything, the target distribution there for the Minnesota Vikings, Jordan Addison has been that deep threat all throughout the first 2 contests because teams are so fixated on Justin Jefferson that they forget that Jordan Addison's 15 yards behind him every single time. So look for that to kind of continue here this week, A, because the Chargers aren't very good in the secondary, and 2, because Jordan Addison's really good, and 3, Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the game today. Outside of maybe Tyreek Hill, there's no other wide receiver that it gets open as often as Justin Jefferson. So you're going to be looking where Jordan Addison, people are going to forget he's even on the field until Kirk Cousins drops the ball into his hands 30 yards down the field. So I really love Jordan Addison having a big week against this Chargers team. If you want to go for that mega stack that we talk about, how about you just go out there and stack Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, and Kirk Cousins? Because I think that's going to be an absolute killer DFS lineup. Now a player that I'm sitting in, this one hurts. This goes back to like Kirk Cousins for me last week, a player that I hope I am wrong when I am sitting him, and that's Chris Olave versus the Green Bay Packers. Listen, this is not about Chris Olave. This is about Jair Alexander more than anything else. And the Packers defense, they've actually limited opposing wide receivers to just 22.45 fantasy points per game, which is the 8th fewest so far this season. Now, yeah, Chicago, I think they played in there somewhere in there. And I mean, the fantasy numbers aren't quite where they want to be, where they're going to be, say, week 8, week 9. But it gives us a bit of an indication to be like, hey, this is not a good matchup. Green Bay's only allowed 2 touchdowns. They've only given up 219 yards to receivers. Again, Jair Alexander is the main reason why this is. So if we see Alexander on Olave, I'm just looking to fade this altogether. This is a matchup that I'm looking to avoid pretty much altogether if I can. Now, you're probably going to have to stick him out there in your lineup because he is a top 20 wide receiver, no matter how you look at it. But I don't trust him. I don't like the matchup. And if I have an option that's close to it, maybe a Zay Flowers, for example, this is where I would use Zay Flowers over Chris Olave just because of the matchup situation here. Now, moving along to the tight end position. Tera, give me another tight end that you can start and give me one that you can fade outside of all of them, but we'll see what you got.
Yeah, your must start. I guess we got to stop pretending that Hunter Henry might not actually have a top 5 seed. He could be it. Every single season, there's 1 or 2 guys that pop up and make a big impact and that you drafted, late and or not even drafted. Hunter Henry was someone that we were kind of looking at and, he was kind of passed over. So it's wild. Yeah, it's wild that people are kind of like not trusting it when it makes complete sense. I was on the Mike Gesicki side and thinking that he would be the one that kind of, not that Hunter Henry would not have production, but that Gesicki would maybe step up a little bit more because of his pass catching and technical profiling as a receiver. But the New England receiving core is weak. Let's just be quite frank about it. Juju Smith-Schuster was signed to theoretically be the wide receiver one. It's clear he's not. It's very clear. He's been surpassed by Kendrick Bourne, by Demario Douglas. He was surpassed by Kayshon Boutte when he was on the field. He has been surpassed by Devontae Parker. Unfortunately, it's just, that's how bad it is that we're legitimately looking at Kendrick Bourne as the true wide receiver one of that offense. He has the highest target share in it, even with Devontae Parker coming back. So it makes sense that Hunter Henry is stepping up and having this high level of productivity in this offense. So Hunter Henry is a must start. I know people that didn't even have him as a top, 12 tight end. This is not judgment or anything because it was common. He was not a top 12 tight end last week. And you had to have him there. I think it's, going to stick. My must sit. I mean, technically, there's quite a bit of them. It was, tough to really choose a must sit because there's you wish that you could just sit tight end as a whole. But to be clear, we cannot start Gerald Everett. I understand that we have loved him in the past. I understand that the Chargers offense is so strong and you want to start pieces within that offense, but it ain't Gerald Everett. Unfortunately, he is in a timeshare committee at tight end. Is that a thing? It's a thing in LA. Unfortunately, he and Donald Parham coexist, and it just is not enough volume to make Gerald Everett relevant. You cannot start him. He is not a streaming option. Go any other direction.
I love that you mentioned Hunter Henry. It wasn't even on people's radar. As of September 7th, the expert consensus ranking had Hunter Henry as tight end 21. Tight end 21. The ADP had him at tight end 29. Just to kind of tell you where Hunter Henry was just 3 weeks ago. Why? Because I pulled it up here right now. And yeah, I'm not very proud of where I had him ranked because clearly I had him outside of my top 20 tight ends as well. So that has already been a miss for me when it comes to Hunter Henry. But yeah, he is Mac Jones' number one target. Why? Because Juju Smith-Schuster's trash. How often have I said that? It's almost like every week I have to go out there and explain to people how bad Juju Smith-Schuster really is. We heard them talking about in the offseason, the only explosive part of this Patriots offense was going to be Juju's knees. And that's what I've been saying for the last couple of years, saying that they've been held together by Hubba Bubba Bubble Gum. It always feels good to get that off my chest every single week. But I'm glad it's starting to kind of come to fruition there. And I think my favorite line of the week was when you're talking about Gerald Everett, I think he was on my sit list here as well. And I said, he is a must. How did I put it? I'm trying to think of the proper way in which I put this. He's a matchup-based tight end that has no more good matchups. I mean, I think that's the best way I put it when I describe Gerald Everett as a sit this week.
Oh.
Yeah,
I wasn't that harsh.
Now, a tight end that I do trust this week, it's Pat Freiermuth versus Las Vegas. We're going to go back to the golden rule that has worked for us for how long right now, and that is start your tight ends when it comes to playing the Las Vegas Raiders. I can say this because I'm a Raiders fan, and this has happened to us each of the last 10 years. A tight end is going to come in here and absolutely ball out. It's what happens. It goes down all the time. But look, Vegas has allowed the fourth most fantasy production to tight ends thus far this season. And the Steelers, they need to find a way to get their offense back on track. That's going to be run the ball of Najee Harris and Jalen Warren there because that's another area that they can attack. And they know that they can attack the tight end position there as well. So this is one of those get-right games for Pat Freiermuth, who's had a couple difficult matchups here early on. And my sit of the week, it's Darren Waller of the New York Giants versus that San Francisco 49ers team. Saquon Barkley, we talked about that ankle injury. Look, the entire defensive scheme for the 49ers, if Barkley is out, is going to be fixated solely on Darren Waller, who hasn't been able to separate against anyone so far through the first 2 weeks. Now, Waller, to his credit or non-credit, has been dealing with injuries himself so far this season, right? We've heard him on the injury report in week 1. We heard he was on the injury report in week 2. Guess what? He's always on the injury report, people. Stop pretending that this is something new. This is a tough matchup. The 49ers are allowing just 7.7 fantasy points on a per-game basis to the tight end position. They've only allowed 34 yards to tight ends in the first 2 games. If that's not reason enough to fade Darren Waller, I don't know what else to tell you right now. Fade Darren Waller. There are better options out there. In fact, I'm going to go over a couple of them in my sleepers. I got at least, I'll talk about this in a second. So, Tera, give me your sleeper of the week.
My sleeper of the week is an ironic sleeper of the week because I talked about the fact that I debated whether or not Deshaun Watson would be my sit of the week. But if you want to get risky and you want to play the odds that he will thrive in a matchup that literally any and every quarterback should thrive in this season and every season, really, against the Titans defense that has not figured out their sad, porous secondary, you can get risky and go with Deshaun Watson. It is, you wouldn't have come into the season thinking that a sleeper pick would be Deshaun Watson, but here we are. If you want to get risky and do it, that is my sleeper of the week.
Well, I've been running my mouth a lot this week on the show, and I kind of put a bit of slander on Gerald Everett, rightfully so. And I talked about Darren Waller in a negative light. But guess what? George Kittle, I'm not trusting him. Darren Waller, I'm not trusting him. So who am I going to trust this week? You ready for this? How about Kyle Pitts versus the Detroit Lions? Yes, I am back in on to Kyle Pitts this week. And no, I'm not feeling unwell. I'm looking at the numbers. If we talk about Najee Harris, if he can't get right this week, if Deshaun Watson can't get right this week on the matchups, if Kyle Pitts cannot get right on this matchup against the Detroit Lions team that has surrendered the most receiving yards to tight ends this season, then it's probably not going to work out for Kyle Pitts. How about 2 more? How about Adam Troutman against the Miami Dolphins? Greg Dulcich, he's on the IR, and the Broncos are facing a Dolphins team that is allowing over 20 fantasy points to the tight end position. I'm trusting Adam Troutman over Darren Waller and George Kittle. And you know who else I'm trusting over those 2 guys? Cade Otton versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, let's get freaky. Let's get bold. Let's close out this show with some fireworks because the Eagles, they've already allowed 3 touchdowns to the tight end position so far this season. Yeah, 3 touchdowns in 2 games. That works out to 26.05 fantasy points surrendered to the position. People don't ask how, they ask how many. And Cade Otton, he's got this thing going on with Baker Mayfield. He put up 10 fantasy points last week. He could put up 15 or 16 this week. He could be the tight end 1 in fantasy. Cade Otton, tight end 1 for week number 3. Stranger things have happened. And normally I'd say, hey, I need to go to bed right now. But honestly, I can see this somehow working out the way this season has worked out and how the tight end position has gone down in the last 3-4 years. Whoo! There we go. There, now I can breathe. I think of the veins, the coronal arteries, or whatever you want to call them. Again, not a doctor. We're starting to kind of pulsate there a little bit towards the end. Tera, Thursday night football, 49ers, New York Giants. What do the 49ers do to win this game? And what do the New York Giants do to win this game?
Matt, is this a serious question?
Stranger things have happened. It's Thursday night football. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, it's Thursday night football, but I don't know that the Giants can do much to win this game. I mean, when San Francisco is, first of all, San Francisco rolling out Christian McCaffrey at 100% rate, which is funny because how many people again, I'm not judging you. I'm not talking negative about you, but there were a lot of people that were very, we can't have Christian McCaffrey as the RB1 overall because Elijah Mitchell. Well, here we are. Your RB1, your guy, Christian McCaffrey, the most reliable back that there is. I don't know. This team is on a roll, and Brock Purdy, if nothing else, is very efficient, is very effective, and he's not going to make massive mistakes. So if you're a bad defense that is prone to being picked apart by a technician, then Brock Purdy is probably going to attack you very well. I just don't see any kind of area where the Giants will be able to stop this San Francisco offense and the San Francisco defense. Again, Daniel Jones is going to have to go out there and run for his life to have any success, unfortunately. So there's not many pieces that you want to actually start. If you need to stream Daniel Jones, that's it. I am willing to, in the wasteland that is tight end, I am more than willing to start Darren Waller just based off pure targets, because the odds are that you're going to get enough to make him a top 10, just purely based off volume. But outside of that, I mean, you just can't really trust anything that you've got here. So this is not the ideal. I know it's a Thursday night matchup and it could go any way. We just saw primetime Kirk Cousins look excellent, like in his true prime. But I can't get hype for this game, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is one of those games I'm just not looking forward to watching. I'm going to watch it because that's what we do, but it's tough to go with. But Brock Purdy has been a pleasant surprise for me. I was really concerned about that elbow, how that would look through week 1 and week 2. Looks like no problem. So quickly, before we close out the show, I'm just going to run off the top 12 at each position so far. The quarterback positions, number 1 is Kirk Cousins, followed by Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones, Anthony Richardson, Jalen Hurts, Daniel Jones, Jared Goff, and Sam Howell. And just missing out is Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield, who comes in at number 14. I just had to throw in 14 just to get Baker's name in there. At the running back position, we want to talk about how upside down the tight end position is. How about we talk running backs? Christian McCaffrey, yeah, he's going to be there no matter how you want to look at it, especially when we're looking at PPR. But number 2, Kyron Williams. Number 3, Brian Robinson. 4, Tony Pollard. Number 5, Bijan Robinson. Number 6, Raheem Mostert, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Ramondre Stevenson, Tyler Algier, Kenneth Walker. And at number 13 is James Conner. At wide receiver, number 1 in PPR is Tyreek Hill. Number 2, Puka Nacua comes in at number 2. Number 3, Justin Jefferson. Number 4, Mike Evans, who's just 763 yards away from 1,000 once again. Number 5, Keenan Allen. Number 6, Nico Collins. Number 7, Devontae Smith. Number 8, Brandon Ayuk. Number 9, Stephon Diggs. 10, Michael Pittman. 11, CeeDee Lamb, who had a 25-point performance last week. Number 12, Josh Reynolds, followed by Chris Olave and Deebo Samuel. Crazy to think that Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't even the number 1 wide receiver on his team. And finally, the tight end position, because it's always fun to look at this. Number 1, TJ Hawkinson, followed by Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram, Sam Laporta. Yes, rookies can be top tight ends, apparently. Darren Waller comes in at number 4. Hayden Hurst, Zach Ertz, Logan Thomas, Kyle Granson, Cole Kmet, Dalton Kincaid, and at 15.5 points, Dawson Knox and Mark Andrews tie for number 12 at the position. That's where we're at. 15 fantasy points gets you into the top 12 conversation at the tight end position. With that all being said, I want to remind people right now, find Tera Roberts at It's Tera Time on the Twitter machine, on the X machine, whatever you want to call it. Miss Fantasy is always looking for your questions. So if you have questions, she's got answers. Drop them off to her, and she's going to answer them on her own solo podcast each and every week. And if you're looking for me, hey, we've got the Vipers Network right here. You can also head over to Rotoballer each and every week for my starts and sits video. With that all being said, this has been the ViperCast. Week number 3 starts and sits, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.